Hello everyone. I was scrolling through some comments the other day and having a conversation in the comments section, and abortion was a topic that was brought up. Unfortunately, pretty much everyone had an extremely terrible argument in defense of it, so I actually got curious as to if they have any good arguments in defense of it. So I looked up the most popular abortion arguments, and I ranked them on a tier list. So I will be going over my ranking so that you guys can, see what I think of these different arguments, how good they are as an actual argument. Sadly, I can only make the tier list on my PC, and I don't know how to screen record things on my PC and transfer it over to my phone, so I had to just take a screenshot of it and email it to myself. So I'll just be doing commentary with regular pictures while I go through it instead of the regular tier list format where I drag them and drop them in there. I know that can seem like a little bit more boring, but I hope that the actual commentary of the video is educational and entertaining enough to keep you all invested. As you can see by the different tiers I have on the list, I'm convinced, the A, B, C, D, and F tier, the dead baby tier, and a tier I added halfway through called the rage bait tier, because one of the arguments for abortion is so bad that I'm convinced that it's rage bait and no one actually believes it. I figure I should just tackle the easy layup from the get-go and tell you that the clump of cells argument is the one going in rage bait tier. It's such a dumb argument that I'm surprised people actually say it. In case you don't know this, any life at all above single cellular life on Earth are all technically clumps of cells. So this is a really dumb argument. Even the no heartbeat argument is kind of dumb, because I'd argue brain activity is more of a indication of life, and that a heartbeat isn't necessarily required for the beginning of life due to the blood circulation of the mother, and it's just not all around a good argument. Yeah, they're a clump of cells, but they're human cells because it's a human life. This is just common sense. I don't know why people try to say this like it's a real argument. It's just not. Yeah, if you say this and you actually believe it, I'm going to assume that you're the kind of person to kill someone over $5 because of how little respect you have for human life. The only reason people even call it a clump of cells, like anything will sound like not that important if you describe it in the most sterile, inhumane terminology possible. And that's just what this manipulative phrase that gets passed around basically is. It's just manipulative language. It's not even a real argument. Since I already started with the worst argument, I think we should go from the bottom up, from the worst arguments up to the one I think is the most valid. So next up on the arguments, we have the economic argument. This one is really dumb because it argues that if women can't get abortions, the economy will suffer, which maybe, but I don't even think that's necessarily true. And it's a terrible argument for abortion, because even if the economy did suffer, you're basically just saying you value money over human life, which is a terrible argument. But even if I'm humoring the argument, let's just take a time machine back to when abortions didn't exist and women weren't dominating the workforce by being half of the workforce. Men were paid more because they had to provide for a whole household while women stayed at home. I'm not saying everyone has to do that, but when women got into the workforce, employers realized they only had to pay them half as much because two people were working to provide for a household. So I'd argue that if people weren't allowed to have abortions, that the economy would improve after dipping initially. So this is just poorly educated economics at worst and valuing money over human life at best. I think I said that out of order, but you get what I mean. Because of that, this argument goes in F tier. Next up, we have the argument where if the infant is likely to die regardless. I think this argument is pretty terrible, and as you can see by the picture I have up for it, I use Ricky Berkowitz for this picture, mainly because he's a good example of why this is a bad argument, because just because a doctor says an infant has a good chance of dying before it reaches the age of 1 doesn't mean it actually always will, and you're basically just gambling with human life at that point. You're saying, I don't want to take the chance on this person's life. It's better I just kill them before they're even born. I don't know why my mic cut out, my bad. Because of that, this is going into the dead baby tier, because this is not a very good argument in my opinion. do see the argument for like euthanizing people who are too mentally challenged to function at all. I mean, at that point, they're just a parasite on your resources, and it's debatable whether or not it's a human life worth continuing. But you'd have to actually let the kid be born first to see whether or not they'd be able to communicate, because some mentally challenged children can communicate and operate at a very high level. I was watching Love on the Spectrum, and there was this guy with Down syndrome that knew like 6 languages, and he was a professional photographer. So it's not guaranteed that your child's going to be a failure. And I feel like depriving them the chance to prove themselves is just kind of evil and pessimistic. Next up, we have the argument that not all pregnancies are because women are just sleeping around and some of them are rape. I hate to be the one to say this, but 2 wrongs don't make a right. And despite how bad that situation is, it's not really a good argument, because you're basically just saying, I didn't choose this, so it justifies murder. No, it doesn't. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Sorry. I mean, the world's not fair, but you knew that because people say it since the day you're born, basically. Because of that, this argument goes in dead baby tier. The next argument is that if abortions are banned, then the deaths from pregnancies will go up. This argument is so stupid. Yeah, deaths from childbirth is going to go up because more people are giving birth. No shit. This is dead baby tier. Next up, we have the argument that some women who want abortions already have children, and that having another kid will somehow make the other kid's life worse. As someone who has 2 brothers, this shit's just not true. I don't know how the hell this is even an argument. F tier. Next up, we have the argument that it affects trans people too. I don't know why this is an argument. It showed up when I looked up most common abortion arguments, but it's not separate argument, because I don't know if you knew this, but slicing up your wiener to look like a vagina doesn't give you ovaries. And if we're talking about people who are trans that haven't gone through transition, then it's the same issue regardless. So I don't know why that we even need to point out that they exist in this argument, because it doesn't really change anything about the argument. And it also isn't an argument. F tier. This one's basically the picture that's a block of text, and I couldn't find a picture that represented it, so that's why. But it basically says that if women are denied abortions, they may stay with abusive people to raise their kids. But in the very same paragraph, it also says that they'll have to raise kids alone. So what's the real argument here? Also, it's not really an argument at all either, because yeah, some women may choose to stay with abusive people, but that's still a choice. It's not like they're forced to, so it's still an F tier argument. Next up, we have the argument that abortions are safe and only have like a 0.07 rate of failure where the woman's like injured or has a health problem afterwards. This argument's F tier because it doesn't actually address any of the problems people have with abortions. Nobody ever said abortion should be banned because it's not safe. It's because you're killing a human. You're killing a baby. That's why people want abortion banned. It has nothing to do with the procedure not being safe. It's not even an argument that relates to the point, so it's F tier. The next argument is that banning abortion will lead to more women's rights getting banned. This is just a slippery slope fallacy, F tier. Now we move on to the one and only D tier argument that I heard, which is the same procedure that's for abortion is also for whenever a pregnancy develops somewhere that isn't the uterus, like the fallopian tubes, etc. And that in some places banning abortion also has these procedures banned, but it's not really an argument for abortion. It's more like an argument for safe abortion regulations. So it really doesn't have anything to do with the actual discussion, despite being a decent point. Next up, we have the C tier arguments, in my opinion, which there's only 2 of. One of them being that if abortions are banned, then women will just get them illegally and in an unsafe way. I find it ironic that the same people who usually are pro-abortion are also pro-gun control, despite this argument going the exact same way for that. But it's technically not really true to a full extent. I mean, it is true, but some people are just not willing to put in that extra mile of effort for something if they're on the fence. So this isn't a decent argument, but it also doesn't really address the morals of what's going on, and you're basically just ignoring the fact that you're still killing a child when you're having an abortion. So it doesn't really address the main issue here, which is that we should have moral values of society that are enforced by laws. So just because they're gonna do it anyway doesn't mean we shouldn't have morals that we enforce. So this is still a pretty bad argument. The next C-tier argument that we have is that women who are denied abortion can go through pretty severe mental health crisis. This is a pretty decent argument because postmortem depression, postpartum, I don't know which one of those it is was the correct pronunciation. I know that's a thing, and I know it can suck if you did get pregnant from like a terrible situation, but this is kind of just another life not fair kind of answer because it's just really not. It still doesn't justify killing someone. Next up, we have the only A-tier argument that I've heard, which is kind of a scummy argument because it really just banks on getting you emotional about it. But I've heard the argument that like, oh, what if it's like a little kid that gets molested and they get pregnant from that? The lowest age I've heard this argued with was 8, which is completely outrageous because from what I know, most of the time when a girl has her first period, it's like 12 to 14. So the chances of someone having it that much earlier is like really low, and I would see the argument for the person's safety on a case-by-case basis, but this argument, like, you're basically just saying we're sacrificing one person's life to save another, but at the end of the day, there's still a chance both could live, so you're basically just cutting your losses. Which is why I could see this being justifiable personally. I don't really have that much of a problem with people who think that abortion should be allowed in this situation. I can see certain situations where I think it should be allowed, but it's not really that common of a situation to have that much to do with the argument that most people don't have abortions because they're a 13-year-old that got molested. Most people have abortions because they're sleeping around. Now, I know that's something a lot of people don't want to acknowledge, but like, people who get pregnant more often are the people who have the most sex. Like, women who get raped also get abortions, but it's a lower degree because, I mean, do I even have to explain it? I mean, they're not having sex willingly. The women who get abortions all the time are. I think it's honestly kind of pathetic how a majority of these arguments are just selfish. I don't want to have a kid because so-and-so happened and it's not fair, so that's why it should be allowed. Instead of actually, being based on morals like it should be. Like, why the fuck do you think we have laws? Because it's convenient? No, it's because we want a society that's moral. I'm personally fine with the current US legislation that leaves it up to the states. I know some people will be like, it costs money to move and I don't want to, but if you want that thing to happen in your state, then just save up. I mean, like, also, life's not fair sometimes. Boo-hoo. I mean, that's such a baby little, I don't wanna. It sucks. Sometimes things suck, but like, if you're genuinely just okay with murdering babies, then move to a state where they're cool with that. Like, don't bring that here. I heard an argument to this point that I said that's like, oh, I have a better idea. How about we let the cities decide? Or better yet, let the communities decide. Or better yet, let the individual decide. Which is such a stupid argument because at that point, if individuals can decide for themselves what is right or wrong without any concern for individual autonomy, then I guess it's okay for me to just rape and pillage everyone I see because morality is subjective. You see how stupid that argument is when applied to literally anything else? You're basically just asking for an anarchist society at that point. Anyway, that was my pro-abortion arguments tier list. Let me know what you thought about it. Sorry this didn't have as much edits as my last video, but I really couldn't be bothered to put all that in for a video that's, I just really couldn't be bothered to put all that in. I don't care that much about how entertaining it is. I just want to talk about how stupid these arguments are because they're really stupid.